The first Call of Duty game I ever played was Call of Duty Finest Hour on the GameCube. This game, along with the original on PC and the United Offense expansion pack, kickstarted my interest in the history of World War II. I remember being disappointed when they announced that Call of Duty 4 was going to be a modern shooter, but at least World at War was a good send-off for the era. It wouldn't be until 2017 when Call of Duty WW2, or World War II, developed by Sledgehammer Games, would bring the series back to the beaches of Normandy. I really enjoyed the game and even played it through Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War's lifespan. So when I heard that the next game for the franchise was going back to World War II, I was ecstatic. I knew this would be the last hurrah for a World War II Call of Duty game, and knew that Sledgehammer would go all out. They had extra development time, an already successful template, and every theater of war at their disposal. Unfortunately, there is a long list of criticisms about the game, which you can hear in my latest episode of Fair 64. But, for me, there's one thing that towers over the rest. Where the fuck is the M1A1 carbine? Call of Duty World War II launched with 31 weapons to use, and there were a fair amount of staple weapons missing from the group, including the Sten, Gewehr, and 3-line rifle, also known as the Mosin Nagant. Still though, we got a good amount of weapons that weren't seen or hadn't been seen in a while. They added plenty of new weapons post-launch that boosted the number to around 60 primary and secondary weapons, not counting all the different melee weapons. That's a lot to pick through, but they were easy enough to acquire after Sledgehammer introduced them into the daily challenge system, allowing you to acquire a new weapon by completing a task. By the end of my time playing Call of Duty World War II, I had gotten all the weapons and used them thoroughly. I also did a fair amount of research on the few that were kind of foreign to me. Call of Duty Vanguard launched with 38 weapons, including the shield and combat knife. Even though this is a pretty impressive number, very quickly disappointment settled in when I saw the list of guns they actually put in the game. Let's start with a weapon that's in the campaign but not in the multiplayer, the Lee Enfield. It can be used in both the Desert Rats and Alamein levels, but it's not on the short list of sniper rifles. It boggles my mind when this happens, and the Lee Enfield is a staple gun in the World War II history. It's like when Mortal Kombat X put Baraka in the campaign, but didn't bother putting him on the roster. The M1A1 carbine is probably one of my favorite weapons from the war, but it's left out of this game for seemingly no reason. Along with that, the grease gun, the M1941, the FG42, the Waffle 28, the Orso, the M38, the MG15, the Browning 30 cal, which was also called the Stinger in Call of Duty World War II, the Carabin, the Nambu, the PTRS-41, and the M1903, also known as the Springfield, are all missing from the game. All these weapons were used by infantry during the war in mass quantities. I find it hard to believe that the Springfield doesn't make the cut in this World War II game. This also happened in Zombie Army 4 Dead War, the Springfield being the favorite weapon of the main character in the Sniper Elite series, just didn't show up in the latest outing. All these guns are currently, as I'm recording this, missing from the game, and who knows if they will be added to it. I could have named a few more, but I left out the more experimental or hardly used weapons like the Lewis gun, the M2 carbine, the Proto X1, and the VMG 1927. Some of these missing weapons have been in other World War II era games, including the M1A1 and the Springfield. So now that we know what weapons are missing, let's move on to the head-scratching editions of Vanguard. As I said before, Vanguard's weapon list looks good while scrolling through it for the first time, but you quickly realize that a fair amount of weapons in the game weren't actually used during the war or didn't see combat. When these weapons were included in Call of Duty World War II as a bonus, I didn't bat an eye, but these guns showing up on the main list is actually quite confusing. Let's start with the NZ41. The designation NZ comes from its country of origin, New Zealand. In history, it was known as the Charlton automatic rifle, because of the designer's name, Philip Charlton. In 1941, he designed the gun with used parts from Lee Enfields, Lee Metfords, and the Lewis gun. About 1,500 of these rifles were produced and used by the New Zealand Home Guard, so that the Bren could be used on the front lines of the war. Nearly all of them were destroyed in a fire at an ordnance depot shortly after World War II, and many never fired a single shot because they were used for mainland defense just in case the Japanese tried to invade. So, a weapon that was produced in limited quantity for use by the New Zealand Guard and never actually saw combat is a main gun in your World War II game?
Suspicious.
Another weapon in the game, the AS-44, was designed in 1944 by Alexei Sudayev, the same man who created the PPS submachine gun, but this gun was produced in very limited numbers and was used only for testing. The weapon was seen as inferior to both the Mosin Nagant and the PPSH, so development of the rifle stopped when the designer died in 1946. This weapon would later inspire the AK-47, but was never used during World War II. The AS-44 and its sister variant were never produced on a massive scale, nor did they ever get past the testing phase of its lifespan, so why is it included in the game? Another Russian weapon in the game is the Automat, which was one of the first operational automatic rifles, also known as the Fedorov Avtomat. It had only 3,200 units manufactured between 1915 and 1924. History indicates that it was mostly used during the Russian Civil War and the Winter War. And get this, it had limited combat in World War I and no indication of use during World War II outside of the Winter War. Even though this is my favorite weapon to use in Vanguard, it doesn't make sense that it's featured in the game above other weapons. The Einhorn revolving shotgun may be the weapon I could find the least information on. I possibly could not find the actual name of the gun, but the information I read said that the weapon was used in the early 90s by Russian civilians and police. The Itra Burst, the only 4-round burst rifle in both Vanguard and World War II, was also known as the Breda PG. It was a prototype automatic rifle designed in 1931 and produced in 1935 by the Italian government. 400 rifles were made and sold to Costa Rica, but never saw action in World War II. Now, I wasn't originally going to include this weapon, but I feel like it does carry the point. The Volksdrumgewehr was produced during the late months of World War II. The name translates to the People's Storm Rifle, and was used by German civilians in the Primitive Weapons Program. Roughly 10,000 were made, but there were 5 different variants in use. The Volkssturmgewehr was designed to be as crude and easy to produce as possible. It was seen as a last-ditch effort by the Germans to arm its civilian soldiers. It didn't even see a full year of use in the war. My final statement is this. Think about all I've discussed here, and how these weapons were added to the last game. Now look at the list of weapons missing from Vanguard and tell me why these 6 weapons were even chosen over any of them. Maybe it was to bring some variety to the weapon list, or they figured people would want to buy the popular weapons in the battle passes. This is one of my biggest criticisms I have for the game. And hopefully after watching this video, you'll also feel my frustration both as a World War II history buff and a longtime old school Call of Duty World War II era fan.